Hello and welcome to this webinar. We're delighted to have a special guest with us today. We're talking to Professor Heather Widdows from the University of Birmingham. So Heather, would you like to introduce yourself and give a bit of a background to this topic of today?
For sure. So thank you, Vicky, for having me. And I'm really pleased to be talking today about Everyday Lookism, which is a campaign that's come off the back of my research as a philosopher. So as a philosopher, I'm very interested in the ideals that we live up to, and particularly as appearance has become more important, we're more and more concerned about looking good, and looking good has become part of being good. So when you think about things like your New Year's resolutions, very often we now believe that if only we could improve our bodies, then the rest of our life would get better. You know, we'd have a better social life, we'd be happier, we'd find a better job, have better relationships or better friends. And so often our New Year's resolutions are just about having a better body, being thinner, firmer, smoother and younger. So this is a really different thing from a philosophical point of view. We used to worry just about our character, our inner selves. And now increasingly, we think about our inner selves as being connected to our outer selves.
So that's really interesting in the context of this kind of looking at social media and within the health aspect. So one of the New Year's resolutions we often get is people go to the gym and then 4 weeks later the gym stops, or Wimbledon on the tennis is on and everyone thinks, okay, I'm going to go on to tennis, and 2 weeks later the tennis rackets are gone. So
Right.
So this idea of lookism and as well as the image culture on social media and stuff, we're bombarded with the images. So do you think social media plays a role in all of this?
I think social media does, for sure, but what role it plays is something that we're still working out, you know. Yeah. So we often talk about the very harmful role that it plays, and for sure it can do. You know, even the images that you see, that you compare yourself against, are unrealistic, and even though we all know that, it's still hard to take those out of our heads once they're in there. But social media can also play very positive roles. It forms communities. It allows you to see other people in similar situations, and it can be a force that helps you create new ways of being as well. But the New Year's resolutions are hilarious. You know, 2/3 of New Year's resolutions are about the body, and even when they're about being healthier, underlying them is really wanting to be thinner and firmer and younger. So where health and beauty come apart is quite difficult to know when it comes to social media and our visual culture.
So that's a really interesting. So I suppose I don't know. Are you saying that we should do something else other than New Year's resolutions? Is this
right? So I think we should think really differently about how we use social media. So often we use social media either as inspiration, and you'll have all that kind of these very idealized pictures that are supposed to make you eat less and feel more positive about it, but in fact often just make you feel guilty that you haven't it. Or we have very sort of body positivity campaigns where you're just supposed to love yourself and feel great. And for some people they work really well, and there's a lot to be said about those campaigns. It's really positive, but sometimes they can also make you alienated, make you feel worse about yourself, because if you are already worrying that you don't make the appearance grade, and then you get told that you're supposed to love your body, even though that's not what you experience, and then you can feel worse. So it becomes a double whammy. So you might feel bad that you're feeling like you don't measure up, that your appearance isn't what you want it to be, or that you don't want to go out that day because you feel like you haven't made the grade, or you're feeling that you're not good enough compared to the other people that you follow on Instagram, whether those are the people that you're at school with or they're influencers and other people. But then if you're told that you have to feel great about the body that you're feeling insecure of, it can make you feel doubly guilty. So you feel bad you don't measure up, and then you might feel worse that you also don't have this really positive attitude that you're supposed to have. So I don't want to say that there's not really good things in body positivity. There really can be, but I think we have to be really careful and not think it's the only answer, because one thing that we really have to do is take seriously appearance worries. We do live in a visual culture, and I think it's not good enough to tell people, oh, well, just feel better, be positive. It seems to me that these worries are real, and we need to take them very seriously.
Yeah, and I think that's really the positivity and the kind of other side is something that the young people, I suppose, that what we found in our studies was really challenging for us, because they're under huge amounts of pressure and this visual culture and this visual aspect. And they're one, I think the angle they're getting skinny shaming, and the other angle they're getting fat shaming, and they're kind of going backwards and forwards between the two, and they're navigating both, and they're not really sure what's going on there. So it's complicated.
It's very complicated, and it's something I think that those of us who were born before social media really didn't understand. And I think that's one of the things that's so amazing about the work that you're doing, is the working with young people, because it isn't true that I grew up in this culture. I didn't. And nor did very many of the teachers and the people around young people. And we're really not aware of just how prevalent it is. And you're so right that it doesn't matter if you're too fat, too thin, too pale, too dark, too tall, too small. If you look at some of the, we've already collected hundreds of everyday lookism stories. People are shamed for being too thin, for being too fat, for wearing too much makeup. So people say, oh, you're fake. I don't like girls who are fake and wear too much makeup. And then we get other stories where people say, that they've not worn enough. And the things that you can be shamed for are things that, you might not even think were intended. So quite often there's things from family members you can be shamed for. So let me just show you one. So I've got a story here that was from a grandmother who said, put some makeup on so you look like you've made an effort. Now, do we think that grandmother meant to be shaming? Maybe, but quite possibly not. So one of the that we're doing in Everyday Lookism is saying, look, when you make negative comments about other people's bodies, you are people shaming. Right? We live at a point, as our New Year's resolutions show, where we are really invested in our bodies as ourselves. So when you say negative things about other people's bodies, you really are shaming them. And you can't necessarily know how that feels. So all of our stories on Everyday Lookism are stories that people have given us because they stayed with them and they felt bad about them, and they weren't necessarily intended. So another one, which this is one that when I took it into schools, there's a lot of discussion about, because some people said, oh, well, that's not a bad comment. It's I was told that I looked better before I got a fringe. Now that's kind of in a grey area. Is somebody saying, if that's your friend, when you or what do you think? I'd really like to know, because I'm not sure I like it. I want to grow my hair again. Right, that could be not a negative comment. But if somebody walks up to you and says it, and I think the point about Everyday Lookism is that we can see the things that stick with people aren't necessarily intended to be cruel. So some are. This one is no makeup. You must be one of the lads. Right? That's never a nice one. And some are just really mean. So I'll give you another one. This is one that actually was done by somebody who was remembering being at school, and the comment had stayed with them for very many years. And it was, I'm Ginger. On my first week at secondary school, some older boys followed me around, rubbing their hands together and holding them behind my head. It took me a week to realise that they were warming their hands on the fire. I've never been more self-conscious. Wow. So see, right, that's bullying. But for them, it was a bit of fun. And some of them are not a bit of fun. Some of them are deliberately rude. But what do we make of this one? When I was in year 8, 2 girls at school invited me to their house. But then they told me it was for a makeover because I really needed one. Yeah. So they span. It can be by friends. It can be by family. It can be comments by strangers. And some of them are intended to hurt and bully, and some of them arguably aren't. But I think this is where we really need to take it seriously, because we do live in a visual culture and our bodies are ourselves. So what we're trying to do in Everyday Lookism is to say, look, it's never okay to make a negative comment. It doesn't matter how you think that person should receive it. You shouldn't do it unless you're in a situation where you're very clearly asked for opinions and it's very clear that that's not going to be hurtful. And we know the stories show just how hurtful it is. So nearly always don't make a negative comment about somebody's appearance, no matter why you think you're doing it.
Yeah, and it's complicated, and it's helping young people to understand that. And I think there's lots of challenges, as you said, is that adults live in a different culture to the young people are in at the minute. But I suppose there are trends and patterns that go a long way in terms of teenagers and young people. So we can say that teenagers, we know that they're more likely to listen to their friends rather than adults. and that peer opinion becomes quite rife in that kind of age group. So it's not only the social media, it's all the pressure of normal teen behavior in that time. And I know, and I'm going to hate saying this, but physical education doesn't always do that well in helping to address these issues. Sometimes it's avoided, but we did some work in our school a couple of years ago around the big PE conversation. We found that people age 18 to 25 were saying very similar things to what you've just said on those stories. Mm. So I suppose, how can teachers or adults, anyone with a kind of responsibility, help young people to tackle these issues, and how can they help them to understand where the voices and the opinions are coming from?
Right. So I think one of the things that they can do is just recognise just how important and prevalent it is. So one of the interesting things about doing this recently, taking these stories into schools and talking to a group of sixth formers, was the teachers were there, and the teacher said afterwards that they were absolutely amazed at just how deep these responses.
Always love a live webinar.
So the teacher said that very many of the girls we've been talking to, they were surprised that they had these stories, because they thought they. And again, there's another phone, another technical glitch.
I have to take it off the
hook. Just talking about these stories and thinking about how hurtful any comment can be was something that the teachers just hadn't realised, even though some of them were quite young. They weren't vastly older, but they just hadn't lived in that visual culture. So, I mean, I think, and they were actually talking about how they could then run a campaign to make negative comments not okay. So the things like, oh, you looked better with a fringe, right? We need to be able to name this. So this is why we talk about lookism. It's not okay. It's a form of discrimination. It's hurtful, and naming it is really important. So talking about it, naming it, taking it seriously. It's not very many decades ago that we didn't have words for sexism. It used to be for your boss to pinch your bum, and even supposedly complimentary, like if you look at Mad Men, and now we name it, right? And once you can see it and name it, you can say that's not okay. So the person that feels uncomfortable because of the nasty comment, when it's like the fringe, where it's not clear, was that meant to be nasty or not, but it sure makes you feel bad, when you recognize that you shouldn't be made to feel bad about your appearance, and that's not okay. Just like we think sexism and racism is not okay, we should think lookism is not okay. So naming it and helping teachers to teach pupils, and more importantly, pupils to teach teachers just how important this is, I think, is a first step in naming it. So one of the things we're doing in Everyday Lookism is people are sharing these stories. Most people are sharing them anonymously, and that seems, absolutely sensible. If these are things that your classmates have said, or your mum said, or your teacher said, you don't necessarily want to tell everybody, and sometimes people still feel very ashamed of these comments. So one of the things that we can do is share the stories as a form of saying this is not okay. Right, let's kick back against this. Sharing the stories makes us powerful together, because we just say, no, we're not going to do this. And that can be the basis of a campaign, right? So any school can have the kind of discussions that I've had when I've gone into schools talking about the stories. At the end of the last group I did, they were just like, okay, we're just going to say that we're not going to do any talking that's negative in any way about people's bodies. We're not going to say, oh, well, I meant it well, because, your friends should tell you the truth, or any of that. I just don't think that's okay. We know when we feel like we aren't making the grade, and somebody telling you and saying, oh, I'm doing it for your own good. Well, when you feel bad, that's not really what's going on there.
Yeah, so that's really interesting. So when we think of a campaign, we often think of the body ideal, and so we try to challenge the opposite. So the size 0. No, we shouldn't be having those kind of bodies. So we should have the Dove campaign, or everybody's types of body is okay. But actually, we shouldn't be starting with the body. We should be starting from your experiences and looking at that from the challenge.
That's exactly right. So the trouble with things like the Dove campaign is they can make you even more body conscious. So they're really well intentioned. They're supposed to make you love all bodies, including your own body. And that brings me back to the bit at the beginning. If you don't feel that you're good enough and you don't love your body, then you feel more guilty. It also makes focus exactly on how the body looks. And we know people get body shamed no matter what shape or size they are. So focusing on your body all the time actually makes you more aware and more self-conscious. So if we say, okay, what we're not going to do is focus on the body. We're not going to say anything about how your body should be. We're just going to focus on changing the culture so that it's not okay to say those things. And then maybe we tone down the obsession with bodies. So what we're aiming at eventually is a kind of culture where bodies really are okay, but we're not going to get that by ever more obsessing on our bodies. Because as soon as you say, so there was one of the Dove campaigns where you had to walk through an arch to say you were beautiful or not, right? You know, that's just telling people to think about whether or not you're beautiful, as opposed to thinking about all the other things that you can do. So one of the things that Everyday Lookism is trying to do is say, right, let's change the mood music. Let's make it much less about how one's body looks and much kinder in what we say to each other. And that hopefully will make it easier to be in bodies. What we must not do is what we've done for a long time and say things like, oh, you know, it's what's on the inside that counts, right? Because we know that's not true anymore. We would like it to be, but we know it's not. And that's not what young people are experiencing. So we have to take them seriously, but also try and change things to make a kinder and more accepting world.
And that's really, really powerful for the body image, the lookism aspect. But I mean, with social media as well, one thing that the young people get frustrated is adults trying to tell them how to use Snapchat and how to use things. So it could be a double approach to tackle multiple things. Is okay, let's start with your experiences and do it that way. So would you be promoting teachers in schools to use social media as a medium to do this, or would you say, right, let's park social media, let's park that, and let's focus on the experiences of you first? Or
right, so this is where you're definitely expert, Vicky, not me.
I'm trying to get some ideas.
I would say that you know, from what I know, and I really am not the expert, and this is where we do have to be led by young people, but I think we are past the point where we say park social media. You know, social media is a form of connection and communication, and we're at the point of saying, right, how do we use it better? How do you use it to feel better? Which bits of social media make you feel better about yourself instead of worse? You know, and I think we're beginning to explore that, and we've seen big campaigns, right? So the reason we launched Everyday Lookism is based on Everyday Sexism, which was brilliant at calling out sexism. You know, I see no reason that this kind of campaign can't work wonderfully in schools and amongst young people. And then once it becomes, no, you can't say that, so that everybody's empowered to say, you know, people don't put up with racist comments, we call each other out. You know, once we empower people to say, no, that's not a bit of fun, that really is not okay, suddenly things start shifting and we start taking seriously how young people are feeling, which is something that I feel that often we don't do with our body positivity and our use of social media, or our general sort of bland comments like it's what's on the inside that counts. You know, young people know that's not true, right? They know they live in this world. They know that they're judged on this and they're part of their peer groups. Key values are how to negotiate a visual world of appearance. And that's how we need to start teaching. That doesn't mean we say, oh, it's only what's on the outside that counts, but it does mean we take seriously their experience. So to come back to your question of where would I start, I think it's almost impossible at the moment to separate people's experience of themselves and their social media experience because they're so intertwined. So it's more about listening really carefully to where young people's experience is and trying to make things work so that they can be empowered to act, to change the culture around them. And one thing that we shouldn't do, I think, the one thing that I absolutely think we shouldn't do is focus on what we do or don't do in the beauty stakes. You know, too often we tell people off for engaging, or we tell people off because they haven't engaged enough. And just to take that focus off, right? It's completely understandable that you'll be worried about this. In the Love Island culture, of course, you're going to be worried about your body. So we shouldn't tell people, oh, well, you shouldn't feel like you don't measure up. Or you just have to look at some of the social media after Love Island to see all the people saying, you know, desperate young people saying, oh, I feel terrible about how I look, I'm going to save up, I'm going to get cosmetic surgery. And you sometimes get kickbacks from people saying, how can people be so stupid? Well, it's like, well, of course you're going to feel that pressure. And if you don't, well, great for you, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't be taking seriously those that do. So I think the one thing that we can do, that we absolutely must do, is stop focusing on what you do or don't do. Stop telling people off for doing too much. Stop telling people off for not doing enough, and start changing the way we talk and think about this. Hence the Everyday Lookism campaign.
That's absolutely fantastic, Heather. So thank you ever so much for explaining this. And I'm sure this has given people some ideas, even if it's just to have a conversation in the staff room with other teachers and share your own experiences. But I'm sure that there'll be lots of different ideas, campaigns, and I suppose it is just literally starting to talk to young people about these issues. So we've shared some of your resources on the course. Is there anything that you think someone should go to as a key site? Would it be the YouTube video, the news article?
Yes, so it depends what you want to know. So there's the website if you're interested just in the campaign in general, but if you just want to see what young people and not so young people are saying about the stories that shaped them and changed them, have a look at the stories on the Everyday Lookism website, and see if your students are interested in sharing those or using those as talking points. And you can go through, oh, that's my phone now. Sorry. Or you can, I'm going to have to move it. Oh. Sorry about that. This is, we're obviously beset. This is there's lots of resources there. You can follow those through, and we will keep adding to the Everyday Lookism campaign. And there's also an Instagram and Facebook site coming very soon too.
Brilliant. So if anyone uses any of this, we'd love to hear from you. We'd love for you to share your experiences. But thank you very much, Heather. And I hope everyone has enjoyed this webinar.
Thank you very much.